Thanks very much, Deborah. So we're on to part 2, which is a conversation about the current valuation, what has happened in USS in the last few years, how we've got to where we are. So with speakers in this part are Tim Wilson, Sam Marsh, me again, Justine Mercer. So if you could all get ready, and over to Tim.
Okay, I'll be very brief for the valuation outcome. The trustees made some extremely conservative choices in order, in a very low, especially making a choice to have a very low discount rate, which has led to a conclusion that they order of 15 billion or higher, and that this will require proposed contribution rates somewhere between 40 and 60% of salary in order to deliver our current benefits. Now, I want to just remind you that it was only a couple of years ago that we were paying a total contribution rate of 26% of salary for current benefits. And so this plot that I've put on the bottom of the screen is the progress of the contribution rates required over the entire history of USS. And the last 3 dots at the end are the contribution rates that were proposed for different scenarios initially by the trustees. This has changed slightly since then, but I think the message is very clear that contribution rates have gone up dramatically in recent years, and the proposal is way out of line even with that. And ask yourself the question, has the world changed that much? No, it's the choices of the trustee that have changed. And as they have essentially made the decision unilaterally to close the scheme because the rates that which they're asking are obviously unsustainable. To think about that just a little further, if you're planning to live 25 years after you retire, your break-even contribution rate would be approximately 33% for future service. That is, you will get your money back if you do put in 33%. And so to be asking contribution rates well in excess of that, you're actually going to be putting in more money than you get back. And really, that's completely against what's the purpose of a pension scheme. And so we're faced at the moment with a truly outrageous proposal, and there's only one thing to do, and that is to fight it. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Tim. And now it's over to Sam Marsh, who's going to talk about Dear Prudence.
Thank you. Yeah, so luckily I've been set up nicely by Tim and others here. So you've been told what a defined benefit valuation is. You've been told about discount rates, and Tim's talked about how those very low discount rates lead to very high deficits and high costs. So what I'm going to do is, and I apologize for the size of this graph, it's the best I could do at short notice. I'm going to just talk you through how the prudence levels that the trustee has been using on its investment forecasts have changed over the years. So what this graph shows in a solid black line is the investment performance of the assets that USS hold in your name from 1995 onwards. And when we get to the present day, you'll see we've ended up at somewhere near 80 billion as at the most recent count. In fact, it's more like 88 billion now. But the interesting thing is how that investment performance has compared to the assumptions on investment growth that USS has used at successive valuations. So if you look, for example, at a number around 2011, if you can see the legend on the bottom, which I'm sorry if it's too small to read, there's a dotted browny orange line that goes up, exponential growth from 2011. That was what USS forecast for their investment growth and used it there in their 2011 valuation as the investment assumption. That turned out to be over prudent because the assets grew faster. Still, move on 3 years and you get a dirty greeny yellow line, that dotted line, that corresponds to the investment forecast used in 2014. You'll notice it's more prudent than the forecast from 2011. And of course, it underestimates what actually happened. That black line soared above that dirty green line. Purple and blue were 2017 and 2018 valuations. They were close on each other's heels. And again, the prudence was dialed up compared to the 2014 valuation. And again, the assets vastly outperformed what was forecast. The key thing for this valuation is what they're now forecasting for investment growth. And that's that blue-grey wedge. In fact, I think that probably could be tightened up, that wedge now. That was a wedge that they had a few months ago. I think they've tightened that up even further. But essentially, they're forecasting no real growth in the assets for the remainder of the lifetime of the scheme. Well, already it's climbed about 20 billion above where it is at the valuation date, which is shown with that black square. And this is the source of the sky-high rates. The sky-high rates are the source of the benefit cuts. So prudence is a huge part of why we're in the mess we're in now. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Sam. That was a great succinct explanation. The next bit is me, and that's another recording. So if you just press. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the UUK proposal and what it means for your pension. Now, the contribution rate that you are paying is going to go up slightly. That means that you're going to pay more every year and get less. Now, this is compounded by our pay not keeping up with inflation. The accrual rate is going to go down from 1/75th to 1/85th. That means that for each year that you work in future, you're probably going to earn 12% less annual retirement income than you would have done under the old scheme. The salary threshold is dropping from around 60,000 to 40,000. So that means if you earn above the threshold, less of your salary is eligible for the DB scheme. And the maximum possible guaranteed annual income that was possible to accrue has dropped from £798 to £470 for those earning above the threshold. The indexation cap is set at 2.5%. Now, previously, the scheme was fully indexed up to inflation of 5% and then 50% indexation up to 10% inflation. So the value of your pension will diminish if inflation arises above 2.5%. UCU have estimated that for a typical scheme member on a lecturer's salary, age 37 will suffer a 35% loss of their guaranteed retirement income that they would have built up over the rest of their career. Now, if your salary is more than £40,000, then more of it is going to go into the defined contribution scheme, and you might see that lump sum going up. Don't be fooled by that lump sum. It's a one-off payment. You have to use that to fund your whole retirement. You may have to buy an annuity with it, for example, and annuities are very expensive. In contrast, the one-off lump sum for the DB scheme is in addition to your guaranteed annual income, not instead of. And that's why the UUK proposal is not good. Okay, and now I think if you can bring up the next slide, Peter. Yes, we're over to Justine Mercer so that she can give us an update on where we are with the negotiations now.
Okay, thanks very much. The independent chair voted with the employers on Tuesday so that their proposals, which Joss has just explained so well, will form the basis of the formal 60-day consultation with members that's, I believe, required by the scheme rules. And the draconian changes in benefits, cuts that will be range between 21% and 35%, will come into effect from April 2022. And we have until the end of February 2022 to force UK to revoke their proposals by a show of strength. It must be escalating industrial action. The SWG were asked by the Higher Education Committee to put forward alternative proposals, and to be clear, this in no way legitimises the 2020 valuation. We made that very clear, and it in no way prevents legal action. Our proposals were underpinned by 4 broad principles and some aims specific to the USS. So the broad principles were equality, 1. 2 was supporting the most vulnerable and those who are already disadvantaged in terms of pay and working conditions. 3 was protecting the lower paid and early career members, and 4 was intergenerational fairness. And those were then translated into 4 negotiating aims for USS. The first was to retain a decent guaranteed pension, which means a significant DB element. The second was to keep member contributions as low as possible. The third was for employers, as I've said, to shoulder the deficit recovery contributions. And the fourth was to keep the inflation protection at the soft cap explained by a previous speaker. Our proposals would have enabled the soft cap on inflation to be preserved via trigger contributions from the employers. And for the first time, it would have allowed lower paid and precarious members to join the scheme for a 0% contribution rate on their part, with the employers paying the same contribution rate for everybody. And the zero contribution rate would have triggered death in service and incapacity benefits, which are very significant for the 15% of members currently opting out. And as Deepa mentioned, it was a subject of intense debate, and UUK pulled the rug from under us because they said we will not offer the same package of government support for your proposals. And that meant that they could not formally be voted, well, they could have been formally voted on, but the pricing from USS would have been even more extortionate than it would otherwise have been. And I want to end by thanking the negotiators. We have our differences, but day after day, honestly, hour after hour, we have worked together. We've had intense discussions. Deepa's right, her pack arrived at 11:30 the night before. Please be in no doubt that this is a failure of the scheme, of the trustee, of UUK, of the independent chair, and it is in no way a failure of your negotiators, who have been outstanding.
Thanks very much, Justine, and I'd like to echo that thanks to our negotiators too. I think we can say that for all of us. So next up, we're going to have a bit on conditional indexation. Now, I am aware that this is a subject on which people have differing views, but we do need to discuss what it actually is because the employers have included it as part of their proposal. So over to Daniel now from Cambridge.
DB schemes can take different forms. Our current pension scheme is one form of DB. You could also have a DB scheme with conditional indexation. In both our current scheme and DB plus CI, the way your pension builds up is each year you get a certain base amount proportional to your salary plus an additional amount. In our current scheme, this additional amount is pegged to inflation up to a cap. In a DB plus CI scheme, this additional amount would be calculated differently. Now, conditional indexation schemes can be set up in different ways. So exactly how this additional amount would be calculated would have to be discussed, negotiated, and agreed in advance by all relevant parties, UCU, UUK, and USS, when the scheme is first set up. A key difference between our current scheme and a DB plus CI scheme has to do with UK pension law. Our current scheme allows USS to claim that they are required by law to charge very high prices for our benefits. A DB plus CI scheme could be set up in a way that takes away USS's legal basis for making this claim in relation to the additional amount. This would allow USS to invest our contributions differently in long-term investments, which have historically performed better than inflation and are less subject to short-term market fluctuations. In our current pension scheme, the inflation indexing is guaranteed rather than conditional, which has advantages. However, the inflation guarantee comes at a very high price. In return for granting that protection, USS has insisted on higher and higher contribution rates in relation to stock market fluctuations. In contrast, in a properly set up DB plus CI scheme, we could potentially have lower contributions and better pensions when we retire. In DB plus CI, you might be worried that USS would have too much power to say, we're only going to give you a small additional amount this year. To avoid USS having that power and to make sure that the additional amount each year is as high as possible, it will be important for UCU and UUK to negotiate an appropriate set of conditions and guidelines for how the additional amount is calculated, and to do this in a way such that the trustee would not have the discretion to limit the additional amount without clear and evidence-based justification. This should be doable in a DB plus CI structure because that part of the collective investments would no longer be under the same legal restrictions that USS has appealed to and that UCU has opposed. Both our current scheme and a DB plus CI scheme have pluses and minuses, and careful analysis is needed to see which one is actually preferable for members.